We've got some more Q&A coming your way. Today my friend Al Duknowski is in the shop. And Al, what's your woodworking dealio? Why are you here? Hobbyist woodworker, you do a lot of work on your cabin up north.
I do. We do a lot of stuff. After I ask you, I do projects like make tables and furniture at home.
And it was a, let's see, the last thing I remember was a big hickory table, right?
It was.
That was for your cabin up north?
It was.
Came out okay?
It did, which leads to my first question.
All right, so here we go. We're launching right at nicely. No time for banter.
That's right.
Going for the throat right away, okay.
The first question is, on hard surfaces like that, what finishes do you find work best for tables and furniture?
Okay, so finishing is always a great question. One, it's scary to do, and you sure don't want to mess up a project. Two, you want it to last a long time. So let's talk about some different stuff. Shellac, lacquer, varnishes. Of those three, stuff in the varnish family, like the polyurethanes, are going to give you the best water and alcohol protection. So a good question would be, well, if polyurethane and varnish is so protective, why not use it all the time? No such thing as a free lunch. The downside is the drying time. So when you don't have a dedicated finishing facility, you have to be kind of careful about your environment. As you brush it on, it could be 40 minutes or more before it's dry to the touch, which means any little dust mites that are coming down in the air are going to stick to it. A real important thing to remember with most varnish is that when you put second layers on to build up the finish, it relies on a mechanical connection between the two layers as opposed to a chemical connection. So if I put on a coat of shellac and I put on a second coat of shellac, coat number 2 actually melts into coat number 1, and they'll bond no matter what you did or didn't do. With most varnishes, read the manufacturer's instructions, but typically it'll say, be sure you sand between coats, and that's not just to get the dust nibs out, that's to put a little tooth to the finish so that the second coat can lay on. Otherwise, it's like 2 layers of acrylic, 2 layers of plexiglass, one on top of the other, and they're not really bound to each other. So, short answer is, if you want to be able to put a glass of water or something else on your table, beverage, and not worry about leaving a mark, varnish and polyurethane, great choice for that.
Heat sensitive? Not
can be still, so it may not protect you from, still put a trivet or coaster under a cup of hot coffee. It's pretty hard to get that kind of protection out of any of these finishes we talked about.
Okay, because I did make the mistake of putting on the bar top finish on one table, and I noticed when you set a plate on there, a hot plate, it'll stick to it.
Yeah, kind of melts its way in.
So it doesn't. We don't have these issues with the varnish or the poly.
Yeah, and not if it's especially part of it is cure time. Make sure that whatever they say, if you need 4 days cure time, make sure you allow that. But then it should be, this is the stuff that the high-end polyurethanes like spar varnish is the stuff they're putting on boats. If it can take UV and salt water, you're going to be in pretty good shape on a kitchen table. Okay. And not as sensitive to heat as your epoxy-based finish was.
Okay, good. Can I go on to the second one?
Oh yeah, I was hoping we were done. I really wore me out.
Yeah, I know it. Second one is, whenever I cut something, it's never consistent. And I know you guys in the carpentry trade, the master carpenters, are always, your cuts are precise. Give me some hint here.
See that? He always knows my cuts are precise. I want you all to remember that. Well, part of it is some subjective stuff. Part of it is kind of experience of how I do my layout, how I do my cuts relative to how I do my layout. So let's see if I can get a couple things here. One is I try to teach all the time, consistency is more important than accuracy. So I try to not get hung up on I have to cut this to 15 and a 16th so much as if I'm making 2 of them or 4 of them, they all need to be the same. Now, sometimes that doesn't work. If I'm making an inset drawer front, it probably has to be a very specific size, and that's where we've got to figure out how to cut to the line. If I'm doing stuff with a tape measure, one of the things that helps me a lot You were talking earlier about big fat pencil lines.
Right.
We'll talk some more about the pencil in a second. I try not to make a line. I make a V. I'm going to do it on this side. So if I'm laying out to 9 inches, I put the tip of the V at 9 so that I have that instead of just that. Because now when I look at that line, if I want to square that off, which part of that line am I trying to hit with the square? Okay. So that with a V, it gives me a distinct point, and I can do that. Now, when I cut to the line for most of what I'm trying to do, I'm going to try to just skin right along the edge of that very sharp line, resulting in that being the length I'm trying to hit. The very sharp line part is important, which means keeping your pencil sharp. If I'm doing real meticulous layout, it's not uncommon that I'll have a little bit of self-adhesive sandpaper on the table, and then I'll very frequently roll my pencil across. And it gets really a needle tip on there. And we might even see a difference between what I had and what I do now. I'll get him a little closer. Pretty close, but if the pencil is sharp, and then the other thing is there's pencils and there's pencils. Don't skimp on your pencil. It's a number 2 pencil in this, a number 2 lead, but we want it to be a hard lead. And I find that if I do this and that pencil bends like a piece of rubber, the graphite inside there is real marginal, and I'm going to make like 3 lines and the pencil will be done. And it'll be like drawn with a crayon instead of a pencil. If it's nice and crisp like this, it's going to hold up better, and that's going to give me more accuracy. So these are a lot more expensive than, they're maybe twice as much as crummy pencils you'd send to school with your kids, but they're much better for in the shop. Then if we want to go a step further, you can go to marking knives instead of pencils. And a marking knife is not the same thing as a utility knife. On a utility knife, we have a bevel on both sides. And on a marking knife, they'll be right-handed and left-handed. This is a right-handed marking knife. So the idea with that is that when I make a line, the flat side goes up against the square, and the bevel, as I cut, is actually helping to push the flat side against the square so it stays nice and tight. And now I haven't drawn a line, I've incised a line, I've cut a line across that surface. That's really crisp. A lot of people who do hand tool work, that's how they do all their layout, because to get a hand cut dovetail to fit together, there's not a lot of wiggle room. It's either right or wrong. So we really need the precision of something like this over what we can get from this.
Excellent ideas.
Does that help you?
Do kids still use pencils at school?
I think it's an app on the iPad. It's called Pencil. Okay.
Yeah. My third question was angles. I'm the worst person.
I thought you knew all the angles.
I've heard a rumor of that. But what's the tool you use that's easiest for doing angles, figuring angles, making angles?
Okay, it depends. Depends on what you're doing. If you're going to make an octagonal frame, the geometry is there's 360 degrees in a circle. And if we want an 8-sided thing, we would divide that into 360 and then divide that number by 2. So because what we're doing when we divide 8 into 360, we get 45. When that's the entire angle, we want to cut half of it on this board and half of it on this board. So 22.5 here and 22.5 here will give us the 45 we need to come up with an 8-sided octagon. So that's kind of the calculation deal. On the layout side, if I'm transferring measurements, this is a bevel square or sliding bevel or T-bevel. So it's not uncommon that if I've already produced an angle, or maybe it's an existing piece I'm trying to match, I can set this to any angle, lock it in place, and then I can transfer that to my work. Or if it's like this, I could transfer that to a table saw blade to get that angle matched up. And it's another one of those cases where, in this case, I don't care what the angle is, I just want this to match whatever I've already done. Setting up something like a table saw, I'm unlikely to use only the protractor on the table saw for the angles. I'm more likely to use some kind of a setup device for that. Another kind of a cool way to do angles is, because most woodworkers have a miter gauge in their shop for their table saw, is to use your miter gauge just like a big layout tool. And if I set this to the angle I want, so we were just talking about 22.5, so let's do that. I can flip this over and use that with my really sharp pencil to lay out a 22.5 degree line. So it's a pretty specialized layout tool that you don't have to pay any more money for, because you've already got one hanging on your table saw.
Good idea.
And because of its rotationality, it's also, depending on what you're trying to match up, you might be able to put this on an existing item, set this in order to find then what angle you're already at. So it just adds a little diversity to what the miter gauge will do for you.
Perfect.
What else?
That's it.
Really?
Everything else I know, George.
Wow, good for you. All right, sir. Well, thanks very much for coming in. I know Lucky Al is heading to northern Wisconsin from here, probably to do a little work on the cabin and a little.
Yes. And maybe a little
fishing. Oh,
I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Al.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. More Q&A next time.